It was just another typical Tuesday morning in the office, with the receptionist greeting the next round of candidates for interviews. But when the woman walked in, everything changed. She strode in with an air of entitlement, her head held high, a smug smile on her face. She barely glanced at the receptionist, muttering something about how her appointment was probably already in the calendar, then made her way directly to the interview room without any introduction or pleasantries. The interviewer, an experienced professional with years of handling tough situations, glanced up from his paperwork as she entered. He'd heard about her from the recruitment team. She was a high-profile candidate with a reputation, someone who was sure she had the job before even stepping through the door. "Please, take a seat," he said calmly, gesturing to the chair across from him. She didn't waste time and sat down, her posture sharp, as if she were already in control. "Let's make this quick," she said, adjusting her sunglasses and flipping her hair over her shoulder, clearly uninterested in any formalities. "I have a lunch reservation that I can't miss. So, you'd better make this quick. I already know I'm perfect for this job. It's just a matter of you realizing it." The interviewer sat back, trying to maintain his composure. He had interviewed countless people over the years, but something about her demeanor rubbed him the wrong way. She had no interest in getting to know him or the role, she only cared about what she could gain. She made a few more dismissive comments, mentioning how she had already been offered better positions elsewhere, but was, being polite, enough to consider this one. With every word she spoke, the interviewer's thoughts were racing. She was the kind of person who expected the world to bend at her will. She didn't even consider that she was speaking to the person who held the key to her future. What shocked him the most wasn't her arrogance, but the fact that she was so certain, so assured that she would walk out of there with an offer in hand. She didn't even seem to realize that the interview had just begun. But the interviewer wasn't one to be easily swayed. He had seen many like her, people who believed their title, their appearance, or their reputation could give them a free pass. She, too, would soon find out that nothing could guarantee success without a little respect and self-awareness. What was about to unfold in this room would make her wish she had approached things differently. With a slight sigh, the interviewer straightened up and set down his pen. He looked at her directly, his eyes sharp, but with an unreadable expression. She didn't notice, her mind was still focused on her perceived superiority. And yet, the stage was set for a dramatic shift, one that would leave her speechless and regretful. The tension in the room began to rise. The entitled woman was about to learn something that no amount of arrogance or confidence could ever prepare her for. The interviewer watched the woman, his expression still calm but with a quiet intensity behind his eyes. She leaned back in her chair, clearly expecting him to be impressed by her arrogance. She tossed out another comment about how she could help revitalize the company with her ideas, completely ignoring the fact that she hadn't even asked what the company was about or what the position entailed. But he wasn't listening to her words anymore. The longer she spoke, the more he realized that it wasn't just about her qualifications, it was about how she carried herself, entitled, impatient, and dismissive of the very process she was supposed to be participating in. His decision had been made. This was no longer just an interview. This was a test not for her skills, but for her character. "Let's take a moment," he said suddenly, interrupting her self-assured monologue. The words caught her off guard. She blinked, taken aback by his sudden interruption. "What do you mean, take a moment?" she asked, a hint of annoyance creeping into her voice. The interviewer stood up, his chair scraping against the floor as he moved toward the window. I think it's time we reevaluate how this interview is going," he said, looking out at the city skyline. The woman was silent for a few moments, unsure of how to respond. Had she misread the situation? "Perhaps you don't fully understand the position you're applying for," the interviewer continued, his voice steady. "It's not about just filling a role. It's about humility, responsibility, and understanding the team dynamics. From the moment you walked in here, you've displayed a lack of respect, not just for me, but for the process itself. And that speaks volumes. Her eyes widened slightly. She opened her mouth to protest, but he held up a hand to silence her. No, please. Let me finish. He paused and turned to face her. You see, your qualifications may be impressive on paper, but that doesn't always translate to success in this company. What you fail to realize is that how you treat others, your attitude, and your behavior are just as important, if not more so. You've already made it clear that you don't respect me or the process, and that's a problem. In this company, respect is key. Her lips parted, as though she was going to argue, but she hesitated. The words she'd spoken earlier suddenly didn't seem as powerful in the face of his calm, yet firm tone. I think it's clear, he said, his voice now softer but filled with quiet authority, that this interview isn't the right fit for you. And I don't think it's the right job for you either. The woman's face flushed. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was used to getting whatever she wanted. A small part of her, perhaps the one she rarely acknowledged, began to feel a little nervous, but she quickly squashed it down. What do you mean, not the right fit? Are you saying I don't have the skills for this? I can do this job in my sleep. You're making a huge mistake. The interviewer raised an eyebrow. It's not about whether you can do the job, it's about whether you're the right fit for this culture. And right now, it seems like you're more interested in proving your own superiority than proving why you belong here. That's not something we take lightly. He took a step back, his expression softening just a little. But I want to give you a chance to prove me wrong. I'll give you one last opportunity to change your approach. Show me who you really are, not the entitled persona you've been putting on display. Her arrogance had taken a hit, but she wasn't ready to give up. She straightened her posture and smiled again, this time more controlled, trying to salvage the situation. I'm sorry if I came off the wrong way. But he didn't let her finish. His voice was unwavering, and his eyes met hers with quiet intensity. Actions speak louder than words. Prove to me you can be part of something bigger than yourself. It was a bold move on his part, a challenge that she wasn't prepared for. As the silence settled between them, she realized that this wasn't just about a job. This was a test of her character, and she had failed. But she wasn't about to admit defeat, not yet. Her mind raced, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play here, something that was about to unfold in ways she hadn't anticipated. The woman sat frozen for a moment, her mind scrambling for a comeback, but her words failed her. The air between them felt thick with tension, and her earlier confidence began to feel more like a shield against the reality that was now sinking in. The interviewer, however, remained calm and collected, his gaze steady, and his silence louder than any argument she could muster. I think you still don't understand, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to himself. This interview isn't just about what you can do for the company, it's about what the company can do for you as a person, as part of something bigger. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. The woman's eyes narrowed as she leaned forward, sensing an opportunity to regain control of the situation. You're saying I need to prove something to you? Her voice carried a hint of defiance. Well, I don't need to prove anything to anyone. My record speaks for itself. The interviewer's lips twitched slightly as he turned his gaze to the floor for a brief moment, as though weighing her words carefully. Then he looked back at her. You're right. Your record is impressive, but it's also irrelevant in this moment. What matters now is who you are, how you treat people and how you handle yourself in situations that don't go according to plan. I'm giving you the chance to prove that you can rise above your own ego and show the kind of respect and humility that this job, and this company, demands. She wanted to snap back, to argue that she had been nothing but respectful, but the words stuck in her throat. She didn't know what it was, maybe it was the directness in his tone or the way he spoke as if he'd seen it all before, but she felt for the first time that she was on shaky ground. The illusion of control she had clung to was beginning to crumble. The interviewer stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the door, opening it as if to signal the end of their meeting. "You can go now. But remember this, the way you treat people will follow you everywhere. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've accomplished. Without respect, all the accolades in the world won't save you from yourself." She blinked, unsure if he was dismissing her or giving her one last chance. Her pulse quickened as she quickly stood up, her pride rising in defense of her earlier remarks. "Are you seriously telling me I'm not good enough? That I don't deserve this job?" He turned slightly, his back still facing her. "I'm not telling you that you're not good enough. I'm telling you that your attitude is holding you back. Right now, your arrogance is the only thing that's stopping you. No job, no career, no matter how successful, will ever be enough if you can't humble yourself and show respect to the people around you." She felt the words hit her like a punch to the stomach. This wasn't the ending she had expected. She thought she had it all figured out, her confidence, her experience, her self-assurance. It was supposed to be a given. But this man, this complete stranger, had just shattered that illusion in a few short minutes. She paused in the doorway, struggling to find the words that would bring her back to the person she had once been, the one who commanded attention, who got what she wanted. But all of a sudden, those words felt hollow. "You'll regret this," she said finally, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. She turned and walked toward the exit, but as she reached the door, the interviewer's voice stopped her. "I already know the kind of person you are," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I'll leave you with this, you don't have to change overnight, but you do have to change. If you ever want to be part of something real, something worth your time, you'll need to learn the value of humility. That's the lesson that no resume will ever teach you." She stood there for a moment, feeling the sting of his words more than she cared to admit. But she didn't respond. Instead, she stepped out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The door closed behind her, and the echo of the final words lingered in the hallway. For the first time, she began to question everything, her career, her approach to life, and whether or not she had been truly living in a way that would get her where she wanted to go. It wasn't just about the job anymore. It was about something much bigger. The woman left the office feeling a mixture of anger, humiliation, and confusion. Her mind raced as she walked down the corridor, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. She had been so sure of herself, so certain that she would get the job, that she couldn't comprehend how quickly it had all unraveled. But as she stepped out into the crisp air outside, her thoughts continued to swirl in her head. She wasn't going to let one interview get to her. She was better than this, better than him. She would just move on to the next opportunity, and this would be forgotten. But deep down, a small part of her couldn't shake the unsettling feeling. The interviewer's words echoed in her mind, "You don't have to change overnight, but you do have to change." The more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. She didn't believe she had to change. After all, her success was built on confidence, on knowing her worth, on standing out from the crowd. But why had it all gone so wrong? Was there a piece missing? A part of her hadn't considered before? For the next few days, she went through the motions, attending other interviews, looking for other opportunities, but something was off. She wasn't her usual self. The arrogance, the sense of entitlement, those things didn't feel so secure anymore. It wasn't that she doubted her abilities. No, she was still confident in what she could bring to any company. It was the way people were responding to her. The walls that had once come down easily were now standing firm. Then came the call. The phone rang while she was sitting at her kitchen table, absent-mindedly scrolling through job postings. She almost didn't answer it. But when she saw the company's name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. It was the same company. The same interviewer. "Hello?" she answered cautiously, bracing herself for more rejection. "Hello," came the voice on the other end. "This is from the interview you had last week. I wanted to talk to you about something." She froze. Her stomach tightened. Was this some sort of mistake? Had they reconsidered? Or was he calling to confirm what she already knew? "I've thought a lot about our conversation," he continued, his tone steady but kind. "And I wanted to ask you one thing." Her breath caught in her throat. "What is it?" she managed to ask. "Would you be willing to come back in for another interview?" The words hung in the air, unexpected and almost surreal. "This time, it will be different. No games. Just a real conversation. I want to see the real you." The woman didn't know what to think. She wanted to say yes immediately, to prove him wrong, to show him that she was more than just the entitled persona she'd presented. But something held her back. There was hesitation now, a crack in her confidence that hadn't been there before. She wasn't sure if she could play the same game again, but she couldn't afford to walk away either. This could be the opportunity she had been waiting for, the one that would change everything. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice uncertain for the first time in a long while. "Take your time," the interviewer replied. "But understand that this is your chance to prove that you can grow, that you can be more than what you showed me the first time." The line went dead. She sat there in silence, the weight of his words settling around her like a heavy blanket. Could she do it? Could she really change, or was this just a lesson that she'd ultimately ignore? Over the next few days, the woman found herself thinking about that interview more than she wanted to admit. It wasn't just about the job. It was about something much bigger, something she had never truly considered. The arrogance she had lived with her whole life, the belief that she was untouchable, was slowly being questioned. She had been living in a bubble, one she had created around herself to protect her from vulnerability. But now, with the opportunity to return to the interview on the table, she realized that bubble was about to burst. What was she really afraid of? The failure? Or something else? She wasn't sure. But she did know one thing: this interview wasn't just another job opportunity. This was a test, one that would reveal more than just her qualifications. It would reveal who she truly was. And for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she was ready to face it. The days leading up to the second interview were some of the longest of the woman's life. She tried to push the nagging feeling out of her mind, focusing instead on preparing herself for the meeting. But despite her efforts, she found it impossible to ignore the underlying sense of dread. The interviewer's words continued to echo in her head: "I want to see the real you." What did that even mean? Was she hiding something from him, or was it simply that she had been hiding it from herself all along? On the morning of the interview, she took extra care in her appearance. She wore a perfectly tailored suit, her hair styled just so, and even made sure her smile was wide and confident. She was determined to reclaim her sense of power. She couldn't let the interviewer see that the cracks were starting to show, not yet. As she walked into the office building once more, she felt a sense of déjà vu. The same receptionist, the same polished floors. Everything looked the same, but somehow it all felt different. The weight of her thoughts followed her into the elevator, making the air feel thick and heavy. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would handle the conversation. But now, standing before the same door, she felt no certainty, only a deep uncertainty she had never known before. When the door opened, the interviewer was waiting for her, just as calm as he had been last time. His expression was unreadable, but this time, he stood up as she entered, giving her a slight nod. It wasn't the grand entrance she was used to, but it felt oddly comforting. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. She took a deep breath and sat down, setting her briefcase on the floor beside her. For the first few moments, the conversation was polite but strained. She tried to keep things light, speaking about her qualifications, the skills she had to offer, the value she could bring to the company. But the more she spoke, the more she realized that her words were falling flat. It was as though the interviewer wasn't paying attention to her accomplishments anymore. His eyes were focused on her, yes, but not in the way she expected. He wasn't interested in what she had done, he was waiting for something else. Finally, he broke the silence. "Last time we spoke, you seemed confident, almost too confident. But I didn't get a sense of who you really were. You seemed to be wearing a mask, hiding behind a facade of self-assurance and arrogance." Her heart skipped a beat, and she could feel her cheeks flush. She had hoped he wouldn't bring it up, but here it was. He had seen through her, and it stung more than she expected. "That's not who I am," she said quickly, the defensiveness in her voice rising. "I was just—" He raised his hand gently, stopping her mid-sentence. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to understand who you really are. What drives you? What makes you tick?" He paused for a moment before continuing. "What made you so sure that you were entitled to this job, to any job, no matter what you did?" The question hung in the air, heavy and direct. She could feel her pulse quicken. It wasn't just about the job anymore, it was about everything, the way she had lived her life, the walls she had built around herself to protect her from vulnerability. And now, they were all coming crashing down. For the first time, she realized that her self-confidence hadn't come from a place of strength. It had come from a deep fear that if she didn't act like she had everything under control, she would be exposed as a fraud. It was easier to show up as someone with all the answers than to admit that she had questions, that she didn't know everything. She looked down, not wanting to meet his gaze. The silence in the room felt suffocating. She could feel the weight of the truth pressing against her chest, but she didn't know how to express it. "You don't have to answer now," the interviewer said softly. "But think about this, your life is not about what you can take. It's about what you can give. Your arrogance, your sense of entitlement, they're not helping you. In fact, they're holding you back." The words hit her harder than she could have imagined. She had spent so many years chasing after success, chasing after power, never realizing that what she was really missing was connection. She had been so focused on proving herself to the world that she had lost sight of what really mattered, the people she interacted with, the relationships she built, the way she treated others. The woman finally looked up at him, the weight of his words sinking in. She was no longer the same person who had walked in for the first interview. Something had shifted within her, something she couldn't ignore anymore. "I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "I've spent so much time thinking I was better than others. But you're right. I haven't been treating people the way they deserve." The interviewer smiled softly, his expression warm for the first time. "I'm glad to hear you say that. Growth doesn't happen overnight, but it starts with recognizing where we need to change." And in that moment, the woman realized that this wasn't just about getting the job anymore. It was about a chance to be a better version of herself, someone who valued others, who understood that success didn't come from arrogance, but from collaboration, humility, and respect. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, she felt like she was ready to walk it. As the interview continued, the woman sat back in her chair, her mind racing. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and she could finally see things clearly. The interviewer had given her a glimpse into something she had never considered, the power of humility, of understanding that her worth wasn't just about her achievements but about how she treated others along the way. Her thoughts were jumbled, but something deep inside her was shifting. The hard shell of arrogance she had built around herself began to crack, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel vulnerable, exposed. She wasn't perfect. She had made mistakes, big ones, and she had spent so much time defending her image that she had never given herself the space to grow. The interviewer was watching her closely, his eyes no longer filled with judgment but with understanding. There was no hurry, no rush to make her answer. He let the silence sit between them, giving her the time she needed to process everything. And then, finally, he spoke again. "You're not the person I met last week," he said simply. "And that's what matters. This job, this company, it's not just about skill or experience. It's about a willingness to evolve. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, but the real test is whether we can learn from our failures, whether we can use those lessons to become better versions of ourselves." The woman swallowed hard. His words had cut through her like a knife, but in a way that felt cleansing, as though the sharpness was cutting away the layers of pride and arrogance that had built up over the years. She was no longer sure of everything she had believed about herself. "I've been so focused on winning," she admitted, her voice quiet but steady. "On being the best, on proving that I deserve everything I've worked for. But I've forgotten that it's not about the end goal. It's about how I get there, how I treat people along the way. And I've been treating them like they don't matter." The interviewer nodded. "It's a hard realization to come to. But it's never too late to change. It's never too late to realize that success is about more than just what we achieve, it's about how we make others feel, how we lift them up, not tear them down." Her mind replayed the events of the past few days, the tension of the first interview, the shock of being dismissed, and now the deep, almost painful understanding that she had spent so much of her life chasing the wrong things. She had thought she needed power, control, and respect from others. But what she really needed was to respect herself enough to see where she could grow, to admit that she wasn't invincible, and to accept that there was always room for improvement. A deep, quiet sense of peace began to settle within her as she looked across the table at the interviewer. His calm, patient presence had given her the space she needed to see the truth, and in doing so, he had offered her the gift of self-awareness. It wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about becoming the kind of person she had always admired in others, humble, kind, and open to change. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice cracking just a little. "Thank you for giving me this chance, for making me realize what really matters." The interviewer smiled, the warmth in his eyes unmistakable. "It's not about me giving you a chance. It's about you giving yourself a chance. You've already taken the first step. The rest will come in time." There was something in his words that made her heart swell with emotion. She had come into this room expecting to fight for a job, but instead, she had fought for something far more important, her own growth. And though the future was still uncertain, she knew that the path forward would no longer be defined by her arrogance or her need for validation. It would be shaped by the lessons she had learned, the humility she had embraced, and the genuine respect she had begun to feel for the people around her. As the interview came to a close, the interviewer stood up, offering his hand. "I'm looking forward to seeing where you go from here. And I think you'll find that this job, and any job, will feel very different when you approach it with the right perspective." The woman shook his hand, feeling a sense of closure that she hadn't expected. It wasn't just the end of the interview. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change the way she lived her life forever. Walking out of the office, she felt lighter, freer than she had in years. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had a direction. Not just toward success, but towards something more meaningful, a life filled with respect, humility, and the willingness to grow. The power had shifted, not just in the interview room, but within herself. And she knew that this was just the beginning. Days passed after the second interview, and while the woman had started to embrace the lessons she had learned, she still found herself questioning whether she had truly changed. Was it possible to evolve overnight? Could someone like her, who had built her entire life around confidence and self-assertion, really turn it all around? The phone call came sooner than she had expected, and as she stared at the number flashing on her screen, her heart began to race. It was the same company, the same interviewer. She had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what to expect. Her mind whirled with thoughts of success and failure, of whether the change she had made within herself would be enough. Taking a deep breath, she answered the call. "Hello?" "Hello," the interviewer's voice was warm, but there was an underlying seriousness to it. I've thought a lot about our last conversation, and I've taken your change of heart into account. I can see you're taking this seriously. But there's one final thing I want to discuss. Her heart skipped a beat. What is it? I want you to understand that this job is not just a position, it's a responsibility. Not just to the company, but to the people you work with. And I need you to know that, while we value qualifications and experience, we value integrity and character even more. She felt a shiver run down her spine. He was right. She had been so focused on proving herself through credentials and accomplishments, but it was the core of her character that mattered most. She had been given a second chance, not just at a job, but at becoming someone she could truly respect. We've decided to offer you the position, the interviewer continued. But I want you to understand something very important. This offer is conditional. It's not about how much you know or what you've done, it's about how you treat others from here on out. Are you willing to commit to that? Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she said, her voice steady, filled with newfound conviction. I am. I've learned that it's not enough to just have the title, or the position. It's about being a person who leads with integrity, who inspires others, and who treats everyone with respect. I promise I'll do that. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before the interviewer spoke again, this time with a tone of approval. Good. That's exactly what we need. You've proven to us that you can change, that you're willing to grow. And that's what we're looking for in a leader. She could hardly believe what she was hearing. For the first time, the weight of the situation truly hit her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, not just for the job, but for the opportunity to live up to the person she now knew she could be. Thank you, she whispered, a tear escaping her eye. She hadn't realized how much she had needed this moment, this validation, not from the job itself, but from the realization that she was becoming someone who valued integrity over arrogance, humility over pride. You've earned this, truly, the interviewer said. And now, it's up to you to make the most of it. The conversation ended, but the impact of those words lingered long after the call. She sat there for a moment, staring at her phone, the realization of what had just happened sinking in. She hadn't just landed the job. She had won back a piece of herself, a part of her that she had lost in the chase for success and recognition. She stood up, a sense of peace flooding over her. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, she knew that. There would be times when her confidence would falter, when the old habits would resurface. But now, she understood what truly mattered. The real work wasn't just in doing the job, it was in how she showed up every day, how she treated those around her, how she led with humility and respect. For the first time, she felt ready. Ready to face the challenges, ready to embrace the lessons, and ready to be the person she had always hoped she could become. The woman walked into her new office for the first day on the job, the weight of her earlier realizations still fresh in her mind. She had worked so hard to get to this point, but now it wasn't about how much she had achieved. It was about how she carried herself going forward, how she would use her position to create an environment where respect and collaboration came first. The first few days were filled with meetings and introductions, and as she observed the team dynamics, she saw how different the environment felt compared to her past workplaces. There was a sense of camaraderie here, a feeling of mutual respect that had been absent in her previous roles. And for the first time, she realized how much she had missed out on by focusing solely on her own ambitions. As she sat in her office, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. She had been given another chance, and this time, she was determined to make the most of it, not just for herself, but for the people she worked with. But the true test was just beginning. She had to prove that she could live up to the standards she had set for herself. And while she wasn't perfect, she knew that every step she took now would be a step toward becoming the leader she had always wanted to be. The power had shifted. Not just in the company, but within her. And she was ready to embrace the future with open arms. Part 9, The Life Lesson. As the months went by, the woman continued to grow in her role. She became known not just for her skills and expertise, but for the way she treated her colleagues, for the respect she showed them, and for the humility she brought to every situation. She had learned that leadership wasn't about being the loudest in the room or having the most impressive credentials. It was about how you made people feel, how you inspired them to be their best, and how you showed up as your authentic self. And so, the woman's journey continued, not just in her career, but in life. She had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true success isn't measured by titles or accolades, but by the impact you have on those around you. The story of her transformation wasn't just about getting the job, it was about becoming the person she was always meant to be, humble, kind, and ready to lead with heart. In the end, it wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It was about proving to herself that she was capable of change, capable of growth, and capable of leading with integrity. And that, she realized, was the greatest achievement of all. As the months passed, the woman became a respected figure within the company. The transformation that had begun in the interview room was evident to everyone around her. Her team members, once skeptical, now looked up to her not only as a leader but as a person who understood the value of empathy, respect, and self-awareness. She had evolved from someone consumed with personal gain and validation to someone who genuinely cared about the well-being and success of those around her. Her days were no longer filled with the same drive for power and control that had once defined her. Instead, she focused on fostering an environment where collaboration and mutual respect were prioritized. She made it a point to listen to her team, to recognize their strengths, and to give credit where it was due. Her approach to leadership had become more inclusive, more patient, and more understanding. One afternoon, as she walked through the office, a colleague stopped her. "I just wanted to thank you," they said, offering a genuine smile. "The way you've changed the atmosphere here, it's made all the difference. We feel like we're part of something now, like we matter." Her heart swelled with gratitude. It was moments like these, simple but profound, that made her realize just how far she had come. The journey hadn't been easy, and there were times when she doubted herself, but the results spoke for themselves. She had found something far more valuable than success or recognition. She had found true connection with others, a sense of fulfillment that came from knowing that her influence was helping to shape a positive and empowering environment for everyone. It wasn't just about being the best anymore. It was about being a better person. It was about leading by example, showing others that it was possible to change, to grow, and to create something meaningful not just for oneself but for everyone around them. Years later, as she looked back on that fateful interview, the one that had started it all, she understood the power of that moment. The interviewer's words had not only shaped her career but had changed the course of her life. She had learned that success wasn't defined by the job title or the paycheck. It was defined by the relationships she built, the people she helped, and the person she had become. The life lesson was clear: true leadership, true success, and true fulfillment come not from what you achieve for yourself, but from how you uplift others, how you lead with humility, and how you never stop learning, growing, and becoming a better version of yourself. And in that moment, she realized that the greatest reward she had earned was not the job, the title, or the accolades. It was the respect she had earned, not just from her colleagues, but from herself. She had learned to value others, and in doing so, had found a deeper meaning in her work and in her life. As she looked ahead to the future, she felt a profound sense of peace. She had found the balance she had been searching for, and it was not just about career success. It was about being a person who lived with integrity, who treated others with kindness and respect, and who was always ready to learn from every experience, no matter how challenging. In the end, the journey wasn't just about the job, it was about becoming the person she had always wanted to be. And that, she knew, was the most valuable lesson of all.